Very good. Welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. Tonight's webinar, another PUAH webinar on the topic of Shabbos and Yontif and fertility treatment. We know that Shabbos and Yontif can be a very beautiful time, an amazing time, a very special, relaxing, and wonderful opportunity to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to connect with family. And we also know that people who are struggling with infertility, they recognize that Shabbos and Yontif especially can be a very difficult time. Shabbos and Yontif can be a difficult social time when we're in shul, when we're around friends and family, and we see the children running around. We see the couples mingling, the topics that are brought up at Shabbos tables, the comments that people make, sometimes extremely insensitive and hurtful. It could be a very lonely experience. And then to add on to all of the difficulties, the challenges that Shabbos and Yontif can present for a couple struggling with infertility, then we have to take into consideration all of the medical aspects that coincide with Shabbos and create what can be a very stressful and difficult predicament often. We'll just begin with a basic introduction, and then we'll hopefully uncover a little bit more of what a couple should know about Shabbos and Yontif before going into their fertility treatment. But as we know, the fertility journey is a long one, and there are different stages, there are different levels, and there are many different parts to the fertility journey. And each one of those parts, each one of the levels and the phases and stages of the fertility journey has to be examined with the Shabbos lens, because Shabbos comes so frequently. Every week, every seventh day, we have Shabbos. Something as small and as quote unquote minute as checking one's ovulation, something as basic as checking one's ovulation to see whether I ovulated this month, something a little bit more aggressive when person's taking injections, how to take their injections over Shabbos. Usually the injections are taken over a course of a week plus. So inevitably there's a Shabbos or two smack right in the middle of your week and a half or 2 weeks of injections. How do we deal with injections on Shabbos? And of course, when the doctor says we need blood work or ultrasounds through that window of time in preparation for an IVF cycle, or if there's a cycle which is going to be monitored, they want to monitor, and Shabbos is one of the days in the doctor's book. So how are we supposed to balance our fertility journey? How are we supposed to balance doing what's right for our family, making sure that we're doing everything that we can to have that baby, to be successful in building our family and growing our family? And of course, never wanting to ever chas v'shalom break Shabbos, never wanting to compromise halacha, never wanting to compromise medicine. So really tonight's webinar, what I would like to do is focus on many of the various issues that come up, the shilas that come up, address them, see how we can figure out how those shilas should be answered. And be'ezus Hashem, as we go into the Yontif season with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippurim, and Sukkot, and of course Shabbos every week, hopefully that will take a little bit of stress off of our shoulders. Hopefully we'll be able to go into Shabbos and to Yontif knowing that although it's difficult and challenging, we have our cycle, that we have our journey up ahead of us, or we're in the middle of it, but knowing that at least the questions, the shilas, the things that I may have asked, I may never have asked, I may never have even heard of or thought of, at least those will be addressed and hopefully resolved, so that will give us a little bit of extra menucha. So we'll be able to enjoy our Shabbos, to be able to make everything, get out of Shabbos the most that we could possibly get. So let us begin with the most essential and fundamental question when it comes to a patient in the fertility journey and Shabbos and Yontif. We know on Shabbos and Yontif that there are different levels and different stages of a chola, of someone who's an ill person. And based on those various levels of the ailment and the illness, Halacha treats that person differently, and Halacha expects different things from each of those levels. I'll give you an example. Chazal talk about a person who is a chola sheyesh bo sakana. We'll start at the top. A person who is a chola sheyesh bo sakana. Someone who has a condition, a situation, a terminal illness, Rachmana litzlan, and their life is in danger. So everyone knows, I hope, that everyone knows that when it comes to a person's life, Shabbos is, let's say, pushed to the side for a moment, and we take care of the sick person to make sure that they can live. No questions asked. Tonight's shir, we're not going to talk about the halachos of PUAH nefesh on Shabbos, but it's clear when it comes to PUAH nefesh on Shabbos, you don't ask questions. You take care of the life, you take care of the patient. That is of utmost importance. That's when it comes to PUAH nefesh, where a person's life is endangered. That is the most extreme example of refuah b'Shabbos, PUAH nefesh. And PUAH nefesh is doche Shabbos. Let's go to the other extreme. A person is certainly not terminally ill, certainly in no state of emergency. They have a slight headache, slight stomach ache, little achy around the body. What is the halacha? What is such a person? How do we define such a person? So halacha defines such a person with the term of mechush be'alma. They have slight aches and pains. What's the halacha for someone with a mechush be'alma? So generally speaking, that person's not allowed to engage in refuah on Shabbos. Really, again, the refuah b'Shabbos is a very big, broad sugya. But let's just say for tonight's shir, let's just say a mechush ba'alma is someone who has slight aches and pains. They shouldn't take medicine. Chazal were concerned that if a person takes medicine, they may come to grind the pill. Okay, we're not going to discuss it now. But refuah b'Shabbos, Chazal said that a person should not be engaged in refuah, in medicine on Shabbos, if they have slight aches and pains. What happens if that level of slight aches and pains is more intense than just an annoying headache, an annoying feeling in my back? But it's something which I really don't feel well. It's hard for me to function. I have to lie down in bed, or even if I'm not going to lie down in bed because I have guests at the table, but if the guests would leave, and I'm just hoping that they leave, I would certainly crawl up in bed. Someone who feels that it's difficult to function, my whole body is aching. So that is what Chazal call a chole she'ein bo sakana. That person, there's no emergency. That person's life is not in danger, but a chole she'ein bo sakana. A chole they are. And Chazal did permit medication and refuah for such an individual. That's a chole she'ein bo sakana. So up until now, we've actually defined three categories. A chole sheyesh bo sakana, someone who has a life-threatening illness and situation, where the halacha is PUAH nefesh trumps, and we do everything in our power to save that person. That's chole sheyesh bo sakana. We have the opposite extreme of mechush ba'alma, where a person has slight aches and pains, where really la halacha, it's very difficult to engage in refuah for such a person. Then we have one level up, which is chole she'ein bo sakana. A chole they are, but there's no emergency, there's no life-threatening illness. That's a chole she'ein bo sakana. There, the halacha is refuah is permitted in a certain regard, in certain instincts, in certain cases, and we'll talk about that. And then there's a fourth category called sakanas aver. Sakanas aver is what the Shulchan Aruch refers to when a person has a limb which is in danger, a limb which is compromised. A person is chopping onions or something in the kitchen on Shabbos, and excuse me if I'm getting too graphic, and the knife slips and their finger gets cut, and if they don't act now, they may lose their finger. Now, would you say that their life is in danger? They call Hatzalah. Hatzalah assures them, your life is not in danger. Now, it could be that they are a chole she'ein bo sakana. They definitely feel like they have to go to bed. They're in a tremendous amount of pain. Yeah, that's true. Perhaps they're even a higher level because there's a sakana to an aver. If they don't deal with this finger now, the finger never may make it. So that is another category called Sakanas Aver. And it has its own halachos. 4 categories when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos. And the critical question, the $1 million question for our purpose here tonight is, how do we define someone who is undergoing fertility treatment? How do we define a woman, a male, whoever it may be, who are unable to conceive because of a certain condition, and they must go ahead and engage in fertility treatment, whether it's for the female or for the male or for both of them? How do we define this couple? How do we define this condition? The reason why it's so important to define it is because based on our definition, the halacha and the extent of what we're allowed to do on Shabbos will be different based on how we define it. There are some poskim that classify for tonight's share, we'll just say a woman who is unable to conceive, a woman who has some type of female fertility factor, a woman with a sakanas aver. Sakanas aver, it's like that finger that was cut. Now, the finger that was cut, we had a finger which was compromised, and we had a risk that if we don't treat it now, we may lose the finger. Now, if a woman's ovaries aren't working, the woman has a uterus, has an issue with the uterus, or the hormones and the blood, it's not that we're afraid that her ovaries are going to fall off, her uterus is going to fall out. That's not what our concern is. It's not so similar to the finger being chopped off. However, many poskim say that if there's no function in that limb, that's also called sakanas aver. And a number of poskim, I saw this in Nishmas Avram, I heard this once from Rav Schechter, that many women who are experiencing infertility because of a uterine factor, because of an ovarian factor. So since there is limited ovarian function or uterine function or whatever it may be, so that's called sakanas aver. And since sakanas aver is a heter on Shabbos to do certain things, and again, we'll get there in step 2, many poskim define and identify this woman as a chola with a sakanas aver. Other poskim disagree. Other poskim say an actual fascinating thing. They say, we listed 4 categories. Sakanas nefashos, right? We said a chola sheyesh bo sakana. We listed the opposite of a mechosh ba'alma. We listed a chola she'ein bo sakana, a sakanas aver. Some poskim say, you know what a woman who is undergoing fertility treatment, you know what her status is? None of the 4. None of the 4. None of the 4? How could that be? Well, perhaps she is a bari. Perhaps she is a healthy person. And a healthy person, right? Now, she's healthy. Now, she's having a difficult time conceiving. But does that mean that she's an unhealthy person? She runs, right? She eats healthy. She exercises. So maybe they're a healthy person. But listen to this. When it comes to refuah, Chazal say we are not allowed to engage in refuah. But who's not allowed to engage in refuah? Someone who has a mechosh ba'alma, someone who has aches and pains. Many poskim say, it's a diuk in the Mishnah Berurah, that if a person doesn't even have any aches and pains, he's totally healthy, feels fine. Chazal never asked, they never forbade refuah for that individual. They haven't even entered the parsha of refuah that Chazal then forbade. I'll give you a very good example. Let's say a person gets headaches every Shabbos or every day if they don't drink coffee. They don't drink coffee, they get a headache around 11 o'clock. I'm, by the way, exhibit A. If I don't drink coffee, by around 10 o'clock, I'll get a very big headache. Now, at 9 o'clock, I may not feel anything. Let's assume a person at 9 o'clock in the morning realized they didn't have their cup of coffee for the day, and they don't have any access to caffeine wherever they are. They don't have access to caffeine. And they know that if they don't get caffeine in their system, they're going to get a tremendous incapacitating headache. Says the halacha, Rav Shlomo Zalman writes this, and this is the diuk in Mishnah Berurah. Let's say there's access to Tylenol. Now, if I would have gotten my little headache, I wouldn't be able to take Tylenol. But before I get my headache, when I'm totally healthy, I'm totally fine. It's just that my headache will set in an hour or so. But if right now I'm totally healthy, so there's no problem for me to take any medication because I'm not yet a chola. And as long as I'm not yet a chola, I'm allowed to take medication because I'm not in the parsha, I'm not included in the issur of refuah altogether. So perhaps a woman who is undergoing fertility treatment, maybe she's considered a bari, she's a healthy person, and therefore she's allowed to engage in all different types of refuah. Why? Because the refuah is only usher for someone who is a chola of some sort, a mechosh ba'alma. And this woman hasn't even yet entered that category. But I would like to conclude with this, first part of the webinar with the most common approach. The most common approach to women or to males who are undergoing fertility treatment because of a certain issue, and that is that they have the status of a chola she'ein bo sakana. A chola she'ein bo sakana, which means that the status of them as cholim is a chola she'ein bo sakana. Again, not life-threatening, not just a mechosh ba'alma, like the other extreme, not sakanas aver, although there is a compromised function, but rather it is the category of a chola she'ein bo sakana. What is the special halacha when it comes to a chola she'ein bo sakana? When it comes to a chola she'ein bo sakana, so there are a few very important halachos to keep in mind. Number one, when it comes to a chola she'ein bo sakana, now this is true of tonight's webinar regarding fertility, and it's also true for cholim in general on Shabbos and Yontif. Although Yontif, there is a little bit of a kula, we'll talk about it later, Be'ezus Hashem. But when it comes to a chola she'ein bo sakana, one thing which is permissible is amira lenachri, asking a non-Jewish person to do the malacha for you. Not even a malacha d'Rabbanan, but even a malacha d'oraisa. Even if there is a biblical transgression and biblical isser, nevertheless, when it comes to a chola she'ein bo sakana, a chola she'ein bo sakana is allowed to ask a goy to do something. They don't have to hint. They can even ask outright. That is one very important halacha. Another important halacha is not even asking a goy, but asking a Jew. Asking a Jew to do something for this chola. Now, again, when is a Jew allowed to break Shabbos on a d'oraisa level? Only in one circumstance. The only case that a Jew is allowed to break Shabbos on a d'oraisa level, break a biblical isser d'oraisa, is in a state of pikuach nefesh. That's the only time a person is allowed to break Shabbos on a d'oraisa. However, for a chola she'ein bo sakana, then if it's an isser d'Rabbanan, so many of the poskim permit an isser d'Rabbanan for a chola she'ein bo sakana. There is a question: what does an isser d'Rabbanan mean? Is it only a real bona fide isser d'Rabbanan, or is it even a d'oraisa isser that's done in a shinui? When you do things with a shinui, you knock it down a level. So if something is an isser d'oraisa and you do it with a shinui, that brings it down one layer, it becomes an isser d'Rabbanan. Perhaps for a chola she'ein bo sakana, if you can violate isurei d'Rabbanan, so then perhaps if you do a d'oraisa with a shinui, that brings it down to the level of d'Rabbanan, and you can then go ahead and do that for the sick person. Let us take that background. I hope it was clear, and I hope if anyone has questions, please feel free to put it on the chat, and if I can answer it on time, I will. If not, we can always get back to you. And at this time in the shir, I will recommend if there are any questions that I haven't answered, please feel free to email me directly at Segelman@PUAHfertility.org. I'm happy to take all these questions and answer them be'ezus Hashem after the webinar, if I don't get to it in the chat. So with that introduction, that there is a big machlokes in the poskim, how to define a woman, a man, a couple who is going through fertility treatment, whether they're a bori, a healthy person who has a certain journey in front of them, ahead of them, whether they're a chola she'ein bo sakana, sakanas aver. Let's go now and delve into some of the very practical and specific shilas that come up when it comes to a fertility journey on Shabbos. Perhaps one of the first issues that the couple will encounter, they'll have that consultation. A couple makes a consultation with the doctor. They sit down. They speak about the protocols. They speak about what the month looks like. They'll get a calendar and they'll say, okay, on this date, we're going to start the injections. And on that day, we're going to start taking this medication, and then I want you to come in here on for blood work, and I want you to come here for ultrasound, and then back for blood work, back for ultrasounds, more injections. So now the patient looks at this calendar, which is very exciting because they have a plan. They have the road ahead of them. They know what they're going to do, and it's exciting. And then the couple looks at this calendar and they're excited. Okay, we're going to do this. And then they see, on Shabbos, oh my goodness, on Shabbos, they want me to take an injection in the morning. Then they want me to come into the lab for an ultrasound. Then they want to take blood work. How am I supposed to do this on Shabbos? And look ahead. Oh my goodness, in the next Shabbos, or maybe the following Shabbos, I see that there's a possibility that they're going to want me to come in for my IVF, for my retrieval. How am I supposed to come in and have an egg retrieval if it's on Shabbos? How is that possible? On so many different levels. And just imagine what's going through a couple's mind at this time, on top of the stress of the IVF cycle, on top of the stress of having to hide the fact that I'm doing IVF with my boss and I'm going to come in the mornings and I'm going to come to work late. I'm going to come to school late. There's so many stresses. Now I have to introduce Shabbos into the picture. It's just, your head could explode. Your head could explode. So let's go through each one very carefully and try to come out with clarity and, be'ezras Hashem, an approach to dealing with these shilas on Shabbos, because they come up often, and it's important for us to have the answers to these very important questions. So let's start with medication. The first thing that typically happens, you leave your doctor's office, you have your protocol, you call the pharmacy, you get your medication, and now it's time to start the injections. So very often, one of the first shilas that we get at PUAH from a new couple starting an IVF cycle is, I'm about to start my injections. What happens on Shabbos? What happens? Right now it's Wednesday. Right now it's Thursday. But Shabbos is tomorrow. Shabbos is in 2 days. I'm going to have to take my medication. So number one, the doctors always tell us that they want the injections to be taken around the same time every single night. So if a person can plan accordingly, that they'll start their injections, they'll start taking their injections at around shkia time, at around candlelighting time. So sometimes what we could do is we could have the woman inject herself or get her injections right before Shabbos. And then after Shabbos, immediately after Shabbos, she'll take her Saturday injection. So that way, it's true, there will be an hour or so between the Friday injection and the Shabbos injection, but it won't be too much. That's a good eitzah. That is a good plan if you realize it with enough time to plan accordingly, and it's convenient. See, in the summer, it could be very convenient because in the summer months, so your injection, you're taking it at 7:30, 8 o'clock on Friday. You're taking your Motzei Shabbos injection at 9 o'clock, at 9:30. It's not so bad. You're home. It's easy. It's comfortable. Fine. But what happens if it's the winter time and shkia is at 4? Shkia is at 4:30. So it's very difficult sometimes for you to have your injection, prepare your injection while you're in the middle of school, while you're in the middle of work. And sometimes it's not as practical as we would have liked to have this injection done Erev Shabbos, right before, on Erev Shabbos it'll work, but you have to keep that throughout the whole week. That's what I'm saying. In other words, on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, you're also going to have to inject yourself at 4:30, and that might be a really difficult time to do it. Now, it might be worth it so that we avoid Shabbos, but it's a consideration. It's a consideration, and it's why not. There are people who find it very difficult, and they're fearful that they won't be able to do the injection, meaning they won't be able, given their schedules, they won't be able to actually practically go ahead and have their injections during the week at that time. If the shkia is very early, it could be extremely inconvenient. Now, is it mutter to have the injection done on Shabbos? It's very important to recognize and to realize that the injections that the women take are not intravenous. They're not going into the vein, and therefore they're not going to be pulling out blood. If a person has some type of injection or blood work where you are pulling dam out of the body, where you are exposing the body and you're causing blood to leave the body, that could be a potential question of a d'oraisa, of a biblical issur on Shabbos of taking blood, of removing blood. However, when it comes to these injections, wherever they are, whether it's in the belly, in the tush, wherever it may be, in the leg, the thigh, so these types of intramuscular shots, injections, are not automatically and necessarily going to be drawing blood with the injection. And since we will not always be drawing blood, and on the contrary, more often than not, the woman doesn't bleed. So since we won't always be drawing blood, that's what's called a davar she'eino miskavin. A davar she'eino miskavin, which is a huge machlokes in the Mishnah. We paskin a davar she'eino miskavin is mutter. What's a davar she'eino miskavin? A davar she'eino miskavin is when you do something where the outcome is not inevitable. If I open the fridge and the light is on, I will inevitably turn the light on in the fridge. So therefore, even though my intention was not to turn the light on the fridge, inevitably every time I open the fridge door and the light is on, the light will go on. But every time I stroke my beard, right, sometimes the hair will come out, but not always. More often than not, I can stroke my beard and hair will not come out. So therefore, if a person strokes their beard on Shabbos and a hair does fall out, that is not usher, because the intention was not to stroke the beard, and it doesn't, most probably, it doesn't cause the hair to come out. That is an example of a davar she'eino miskavin. An injection is another example of a davar she'eino miskavin. I am injecting myself. Now, my kavana is certainly not to draw blood. My kavana is to inject the medication, the hormones into the body. So my kavana is not to draw blood, and most probably I'm not going to draw blood. Now, what happens if oy vavoy, I made the injection, I took out the needle, the syringe, and there was blood? Again, that's a davar she'eino miskavin. That is mutter. That is mutter. Again, our kavana can't be to want blood, and we also can't set ourselves up in a situation where we will definitely be drawing blood. But in this case, it will be permissible. The injection is permissible. Now, some poskim recommend finding a non-Jewish person, a non-Jewish nurse, a non-Jewish person to administer the shots, because maybe blood's going to come and it might be better. I've seen a number of poskim say, listen, if you have a non-Jewish person available and they're comfortable and you're comfortable with them doing it, so why not ask a non-Jew to administer the shot? However, more often than not, it becomes very difficult. It becomes very complicated. It becomes very stressful to try to find the non-Jewish person on Shabbos to administer the shot. And therefore, la halacha, many poskim will allow the Jew to inject herself, have a friend do it, a husband, whoever it may be, even on Shabbos. Now, there are other considerations when it comes to the injection. You have to take a swab, and you have to take the alcohol rub, and to make sure that the area is clean before actually injecting yourself on that spot. Be careful that when you open the package, you're not ripping any letters. Be careful that when you are applying pressure on your skin, you're not pressing too hard on the alcohol rub, that you're causing schita, that you're causing any of the liquid to come forth from the cloth. That would be squeezing. That would be similar to a sponge. We know we don't use sponges on Shabbos schita. We don't wring things out. So be careful when you are rubbing the area right before the injection. Make sure that it's done in a way that we can avoid the issues of schita. Mixing some of the components, mixing some of the ingredients. Sometimes you have a pre-made shot. Other times you have to mix. So many of the poskim say, even though you're mixing a solid into a liquid and you're making a new type of concoction, that's not a problem. It's not a problem of lush. It's very liquidy. And even if there is a congealment of some sort, you're making something, you're turning a liquid into something a little bit more firm. Nevertheless, since the overwhelming majority is a shot, it's an injection, it is a liquid, there's no problem of lisha. And finally, there's an issue potentially of connecting the syringe to connecting the shot, taking the parts and putting them together. Not always are they delivered in one pre-made injection. So some have said, I've seen some say that you should do everything before Shabbos. Tear the packages, and prepare the shots and do everything before Shabbos. However, I've spoken to a number of doctors that do not recommend that because it compromises the sterility of the shot. We want everything to be as sterile, as clean, and hygienic as possible. And therefore, the doctors really do not recommend preparing it before Shabbos, even though in general, the rule is when it comes to Shabbos, the more we can prepare for Shabbos, the better. The more we can try to do before Shabbos to avoid any Shabbos issues, the better. Here it's difficult because it comes at a price, and we don't want to open it before Shabbos and have compromised the shot, the injection, one iota. So therefore, many of the doctors really do not recommend that, and they say that the shot should be mixed and assembled immediately prior to the injection. If that's the case, many of the poskim say that since this is a chad pa'ami situation, you're going to put it together, it's going to be discarded and thrown out, and not going to be assembled in a very permanent fashion. So therefore, it is not a problem. There's also another consideration of ein binyan b'kelim. When it comes to kelim, it's not so clear that the Isser of Bona applies there. So for a number of reasons, it is permissible to assemble the syringe on Shabbos. One final note when we talk about this, but really everything, and as we mentioned it earlier, that as soon as you introduce a shinui into the equation, you always knock down the level of Isser. You knock it down a level. Whether it's a deraisa, then maybe it can become a derabanan. If it's a derabanan, maybe it's only a derabanan with a shinui, which is much better than a derabanan without a shinui. Anything that we can do over here with a shinui, the better. I'll give you an example. Even when we talk about taking the alcohol rub, so even if you could hold it in a manner which is awkward, uncomfortable, and atypical, you don't use it and apply pressure like you typically would, but you hold it in between your fingers, something like that. Maybe, just maybe, there might be a problem of schita, but as long as you're doing it with a shinui, so you knock it down a level and you protect yourself lest anything chas v'shalom happens. The only thing I would just warn you is injections with a shinui. I always get a little bit nervous. I don't like telling people they should inject themselves with a shinui. Chas v'shalom, they could mess up, they could fall, they could slip. The injection, you should be careful. But all of the preparations, anything that you can do, any type of shinui that you can introduce, which is both practical, it'll allow you to actually get the same end result, but doing it with a shinui, that really is the best. We spoke about the injections not drawing blood. You know what it's an example of where there is blood that's drawn? A blood draw. When the doctor tells you that we need blood, we need a blood sample. Now, the blood sample during the 2 week wait, the 2 weeks or week and a half leading up to an egg retrieval, the blood work is a very, very important test. It really is critical that the doctors are monitoring you and how you're responding to the medication. And one of the best ways that they could get those results is through a blood test. It's a very important part of the journey. It's a very important part of the workup. That being said, when it comes to Shabbos, a blood draw is really an Isser D'Oraisa, right? A blood draw is really a problem. And without getting into it, sometimes when people bleed, we could say maybe it's not really an Isser D'Oraisa because it's called a malacha she'eino tzricha legufa. You don't actually need the blood. But here, it's a malacha hatzricha legufa. Here, you actually need the blood. So it's a really difficult shaila. Luckily, thank God, Baruch Hashem, with the thanks and the help of many of the staff at PUAH, we have been able to set up a system where if a person needs blood work on Shabbos, the doctor tells them that you're responding to the medication very nicely. We're going to have to check you on Saturday to see how you are responding. So, as I said before, it really is a very critical and important part of your workup. We don't want to forego, we don't want to ignore or dismiss that blood draw. So therefore, we have a system where you call PUAH before Shabbos, or as soon as you know when you are going to have a blood draw, when you know that you're going to have a Shabbos blood draw, you call us up. We will find out where you are, which center you're with, what time the doctor needs your blood, all of the details. I'll have a non-Jewish nurse come to your home. The phlebotomist will draw blood, will deliver the blood to the lab. We'll give it to the lab on time, just like the patient was in the office at the right time. They'll be able to run the results, and then they can text you, email you with the directions of what to do now. Oh, we see you're responding beautifully. Keep on taking the medication. Oh, we see that you're not responding as we would have wanted to. Up your medication. Instead of two, let's say 2 pills, take another third. Take a third. Do this injection, introduce this into your protocol. We really have to know how to proceed based on the blood, and we really don't want to, we don't want to cut that blood draw out, and therefore it's a very amazing service that we have, Baruch Hashem. Please, everyone should feel free to call the PUAH number. You can find it on our website, and one of the prompts is Shabbos blood work, and we will be able to take care of that. Another thing that they tell you with the blood work is ultrasounds. So ultrasounds are actually less important. They're important, but they might be less important than the blood work. Often doctors have told me that they're comfortable seeing the patient on Friday and then again seeing the patient on Sunday, doing an ultrasound on Friday, doing the ultrasound on Sunday, but the blood work, sometimes the doctors will not allow us to skip the blood work, and that's why we have this system set up where we can actually bring them the blood work and deliver to them on Shabbos. Sometimes, okay, so I see that a number of questions are coming in. What I'll do now, I think I'm just going to continue, and then at the end I'll go back and read the chat. So feel free to post any, continue posting questions on the chat, and then at the end of the shir, Be'ez Hashem, I will go back and read some of the questions. I see the truth is someone just sent something that I planned on discussing. Sometimes the doctors tell you that they want you to take a pregnancy test. They want you to take a pregnancy test. They want you to take a pregnancy test at home because the pregnancy test will give them an indicator of how you're responding. So what's the halacha about taking a pregnancy test on Shabbos? What's the halacha about taking an ovulation test on Shabbos? So we'll start the opposite. Women who want to know when they're ovulating, so they're waiting for a child. They're trying to time intercourse so that it should match up right with ovulation. They want to be able to not to miss the ovulation, chas v'shalom. Maybe that's what they think that's why they're not getting pregnant. So they're really watching and monitoring their ovulation as closely as possible. But then, Shabbos comes. So a number of the poskim were asked the shaila, and for the most part, the poskim were not so comfortable permitting ovulation tests on Shabbos because why do you need to test the ovulation on Shabbos? Have relations. What's the ovulation test going to tell you? Oh, I'm ovulating. So what are you going to do if you find out that you're ovulating? Well, have relations. So just have relations. If you have relations, so then it doesn't make a difference if you're ovulating or not. You empower yourself, you put yourself in the right position to hopefully conceive. So a number of the poskim were not comfortable permitting ovulation in general. However, there are specific cases where it is important, where it really is important to test ovulation. And the Shmir Shabbos Kelchasa discusses ovulation tests on Shabbos, and very often the poskim will permit it in situations of need. Why? Why should we allow this in situations of need? Isn't it maybe a problem of tzovea? What's happening? A woman is urinating into a cup and then she's placing, let's say, a stick, and the stick is going to change color. Or sometimes you have the new fancy schmancy ones where there's a smiley face, an image comes up. So many of the poskim say that although that there is coloring involved and although there is an image that does come up, but very often those images are not miskayim, they're not ever long lasting. The image will, within a few hours or 24 hours, it will not last, or you throw it out and it's something which is it's holech leibud. It's when you're coloring something, you don't care about the actual color, and then you're discarding it. So many poskim, the Tzitz Eliezer and the Shmir Shabbos Kelchasa, they write in cases of need, it is permissible to take the ovulation test. It is permissible to take a pregnancy test should the doctor tell you that it's a very, very important part of your journey. One pinach that I will offer, as I said before, anytime that you can introduce a shinui, the better. So for instance, let's say you typically urinate in the cup and then you place the stick into the, let's say you take your fingers and you put the stick into the cup. Maybe if you could place the stick with a shinui, if you could, I don't know about urinating on the stick, but finding a way to do it in an abnormal, atypical fashion, that might even make it even better. So again, even if just placing the stick, holding it between your two hands and placing it into the cup, so that not everyone would agree that that's a shinui, but I think that's enough. There's enough to rely on that you're doing it with a shinui. So as long as you're introducing a shinui on something which is anyway in the Rabbanan, then you're good to go. Now, it gets very complicated when the doctor tells you that they want you to come in to the lab on Shabbos because of an IUI, because of an IVF, right? Looks based on your cycle that the best time to go ahead with the IVF is Shabbos. The best time to go ahead with the IUI is Shabbos. So what do we do in that situation? So I'll tell you, let's start with IUI because it's easier. When it comes to IUI, so it's true that there are some cases where the IUI must be done on Shabbos, and if it's not done on Shabbos, we lost the whole month. It's possible. But I've spoken to many, many doctors about this because it happens. It happens that throughout the cycle, inevitably, Shabbos, which is in the cards, things can fall out on Shabbos. Many doctors are comfortable doing an IUI on Friday. We know that the sperm, the zera, will last in the body for a number of days. And even though might have been the best day to do the insemination was Shabbos, but if the insemination was done just one day prior on Friday, the sperm is still going to be in the body. The sperm is still going to be swimming around, and it can will certainly live out until the time of ovulation, which was anticipated, let's say, on Shabbos or Sunday. So in a case where the doctors tell you, looks like you should come in on Saturday, it's worthwhile to have a conversation with the doctor. And I have this conversation all the time. People call and I speak to the doctors on their behalf as their advocates. And we say, Doc, is it possible we could do the IUI on Friday? Is it possible we could do a second IUI on Sunday? Is it possible we could do the IUI in the office on Friday and then tell the couple to have relations at home on Friday night, right? Or on Saturday, when they would have come for the IUI, maybe we could have them have relations on Saturday, on Shabbos. And then maybe if they want to go ahead, come back and do it on Sunday, they can. Most of the time, 99% of the time, the doctors will say yes. So very often, we do not have situations where you must go to the lab on Shabbos for an IUI. Almost always we're able to circumvent it, to have the IUI done on Friday, encourage the couple to be intimate on Shabbos, and based on how she's responding, to do something on Sunday also. So usually there's no pressing need to have an IUI done on Shabbos. What about an IVF? An IVF is a lot more complicated because in IVF, we're growing the follicles, we're monitoring the follicles. We need to make sure that we ovulate at the right time, because if it gets too long and she doesn't ovulate, then all of the follicles, all of the oocytes, all of the eggs could be compromised and might not fertilize at all. So there, it's a more sensitive question, but yet there's still wiggle room. Again, and I see that there are doctors on this call, and I certainly wouldn't have hoped to never overstep our rabbinic boundaries and encroach on medical territory. But I will just tell you from so many conversations that I've had with fertility specialists, not from, everyone has said the basic concept that there is no perfect time to do the IVF retrieval. There is no such thing as the minute that we have to take out the eggs. A second too early is too early. A minute too late is too late. It doesn't work like that. There's a spectrum. It's a window of time. And therefore, some women, when the doctor tells them that it's time to do the IVF retrieval on Saturday, so sometimes that window, that spectrum is a Friday, Saturday. Sometimes it's a Saturday, Sunday. But again, it's a window, it's a spectrum. There are a number of hours that our prime time. It will be a prime time to do this IVF, to do the retrieval on this woman. And again, I'll have the same conversation with the doctor. Doc, can we help out this Jewish couple? Can we help them that instead of coming in on Saturday to do the retrieval, maybe we could have a Friday retrieval? We can, because we know that this lady, maybe she's a Friday, Saturday. It might be Saturday was the best, but Friday is still not out of the card, out of the picture. So maybe we could, and maybe if we know in advance, stimulate her a little bit more so that Friday will be the day. And sometimes we can hold back on stimulation if we see that she's going to stim on Friday. Maybe the IVF is going to be a Saturday, but might be a Saturday, Sunday. Maybe we could push her off one more day and do the retrieval on Sunday. Baruch Hashem, more often than not, we're able to do that. More often than not, we're able to either push off the IVF retrieval or to make it a little bit sooner, to make it on Friday, and that way the couple doesn't have to come into the lab on Shabbos. However, there are times where a woman does have to come in on Shabbos because really that is the day. And if we push it off, it really will affect her negatively. And if we do it too soon, it's just going to be too early. So really Shabbos is the time to do it. Under those circumstances, we are mater. We do allow, understanding the sensitivity of the situation and understanding the nuances of each situation, we will, based on the case, allow for the couple to go in to the center on Shabbos. Often it's better to find a hotel nearby so you don't have to drive. Certainly never driving with a Jew. That would never be permissible because in order to drive with a Jew, you'd have to fall into the category of PUAH nefesh, of sakanas nefashos, of chole sheyesh bo sakana. Here at most we're a chole she'ein bo sakana or sakanas aver, but you cannot permit a Jew to do the malacha. So therefore, either stay close to the center so you can walk, right? And you can walk, or finding a non-Jewish driver, an Uber, a cab driver, to transport you from where you are to the center. But again, everything has to be al yidei a nachri. It has to be done through a non-Jewish person. Chas v'shalom, you can never permit a Jewish person to be machal Shabbos for anyone doing an IVF or an IUI or any type of cycle, because no matter how broken we are, we're not sakanas nefashos. We're not sakanas nefashos. The IVF, we know, consists of two parts. It's the egg retrieval, and then there's the egg transfer, putting the embryo back into the woman. So when it comes to putting the embryo back into the woman, the embryo transfer, so that typically never takes place on Shabbos because it doesn't have to. We can manipulate that the egg retrieval will be done on a weekday. It doesn't have to be done on Shabbos, and therefore we will tell a couple to avoid. If the doctor says the egg transfer should be done on Shabbos, we should find a different day to do the egg transfer. Egg transfer should not be done on Shabbos. There's a fascinating, just talking about pikuach nefesh, sakanos nefashos. There was a fascinating shaila that came up in Eretz Yisrael many years ago, and that was a horrible situation where the doctors found out that there was a power outage in the lab. And the difficulty of having a power outage in the lab is that the cryo containers that are hosting hundreds, if not thousands of couples' genetic material, eggs, sperm, embryos, the power went out and the temperature of these containers started to drop. Okay, and it started to rise, actually. It got hotter. And if it gets hotter, that means that all of these frozen eggs, frozen embryos, frozen material is now going to thaw. And as we know, once it thaws, it's done. So there was a huge scare. What do we do about this lab and saving all of these embryos? So I'm going to take us a little bit off topic because it's an important off-topic discussion. But it ties into the Shabbos discussion because this happened on a Shabbos. Are you allowed to get in the car and drive to the center? Because after all, how many nefashos, how many embryos are at risk? How many nefashos, how many Yiddish embryos are going to be destroyed, chas v'shalom, if we don't get involved, if we don't drive, if we don't get there, if we don't fix this issue. Now, here comes the critical question. What is the status of an embryo? Is the status of an embryo life? Do we say pikuach nefesh on an embryo? Or no, pikuach nefesh doesn't apply to an embryo. Pikuach nefesh applies to an embryo once it's introduced to its womb. Once it is bichala, once it becomes part of the woman, it's transferred into the woman, and now she becomes pregnant. Then we can discuss pikuach nefesh. But up until that point, that's not pikuach nefesh. So if it's not pikuach nefesh, are we able to get into the car and drive? Many of the poskim, if not all of the poskim, said absolutely not. Now, a nachri, a guy, can drive. Yeah, yes, you could take an Uber to the lab. You can do things to save hundreds and thousands of embryos and of just tons of money, tons of people's blood, sweat, and tears. Mamish. Can you imagine how heartbreaking this is? But not al yidei Yisrael. You wouldn't be allowed to ask a Jew to do that. Now, what's one of the most common questions that we get at PUAH? People have embryos. They want to know, well, what happens with the leftover embryos? I have embryos. Some are aneuploidy. They're not healthy. Some are, it's very undetermined whether these are healthy embryos. Are we going to use them? Are we not going to use them? We have many embryos. Baruch Hashem, I got pregnant as many times as I want, and I can't handle any more children, so I'm not going to use these embryos. Am I allowed to throw them out? Am I allowed to discard them? Am I allowed to just throw them in the garbage? Is that not murder? Is that not like a mini abortion? So the answer is no, it is not. It is not. Why? Because just like we wouldn't be able to break Shabbos for these embryos because it's not called a nefesh, that's not called pikuach nefesh, so too destroying them, discarding them, is also not called losing a nefesh. It's not called a termination, an abortion, whatever you want to refer to it as. It is not. And therefore, la halacha, once a couple is absolutely crystal clear, they know they're never going to use these embryos ever again, so then it is halachically permissible to discard the embryo. Again, I always tell people, and as silly and as childish as this sounds, it is just important. Once you discard an embryo, you can never get that embryo back. And therefore, think twice and 3 times and 4 times before you come to the conclusion that you no longer want this embryo, because once you discard it, you're not getting it back. And I do not want to hear that heartbreaking phone call. No one wants to hear that I discarded my embryo because why? Because I got the bill from the center that I have to renew my payment for the year. So I'm thinking, I'm not going to use it anyway. Why do I have to pay them? So I'll have them discard it. And then since 6 months later, wife looks at husband, husband looks at wife, we want another baby, let's do another transfer. Oy, we discarded our embryos. If you even have the smallest havamina, smallest shadow of a doubt that maybe, just maybe, we're going to want another, and you had to go through such such feats of IVF, what you did to make those embryos, please be careful and think twice and again before discarding the embryos, to make sure that you're never found in a vulnerable position or in a very difficult position or in the position where you're just so sad and broken, wishing you had, regretting that you threw out those embryos. The hour is almost up. I wanted to get to one more thing, and then I want to read some of the questions that we have on the chat, because I do see that they're interesting and practical. The one consideration that I'll leave us with is as follows. We discussed different categories in halacha. Someone who is this type of chola, that type of chola. I want to throw something out there, and just think about it. Feel free to email me. Feel free to think about it. You don't have to email me. You don't have to think about it. But I think that it deserves a consideration. What is the status of someone who is going through such emotional turmoil, such an emotionally difficult situation? What is the status of such a person? So often we're getting phone calls from women, from men, who are just broken. They're so sad. They're in so much pain because of their infertility journey. their failed cycle, their miscarriage, their stillborn, their IVF. They had, I just got a call from someone, 20 eggs. They were optimistic, 20 then down to 10. And then they did testing, 0. Could you imagine going through all of that to then have the doctor tell you, sorry, it yielded nothing? Nothing? All of the money, all of the time, all of the effort, all of the energy, the embarrassment, the shame, everything for nothing. It's a very, very, very difficult situation to be in. A very difficult situation to be in. Such a person is sad. Such a person is depressed. Such a person is in pain. What is the status of such a person on Shabbos? Now, are they healthy? Totally healthy. They could run a marathon. The shitas, the opinions that hold that a person is not a chol l'shem b'sakana. You don't even have to come on to this. Anyway, people hold that they're a chol l'shem b'sakana. But let's say we didn't understand these people to be a chol l'shem b'sakana. Are we able to say that the trauma and the emotional turbulence that they're going through and that they're experiencing will actually give them the status of a chol l'shem b'sakana? And my friends, I did research on this, and yes, the answer is, according to many poskim, yes. I saw Rav Nevinsal says such a thing. I saw Rav Yaakov Emden mention such a thing, and others, that we should take into account that when we talk about choli, when we talk about sickness, sometimes we're not just talking about the physical illness, the physical and bodily illness or lack of function, but maybe it's the psychological and the emotional illness as well. And at this point, I want to encourage everyone who's going through your own emotional and difficult journey that we are here for you. The PUAH Cares team, which we are so proud of, a group of amazing, amazing therapists and social workers, are here to speak to you, to be machazek you, to give you what you need. I really I think it is such an important resource that everyone should know about. And be'ezus Hashem, if you need it, we are here for you. We want to support you in every way possible. So I'll officially end the webinar here, wishing everyone a ksiva v'chasima tova, a good gebench dior, a year of blessing in all areas. In all areas. You know, this is a webinar where we're coming together to talk about fertility and halacha and Shabbos and Yontif. But just because we're going through infertility doesn't mean that we need other brachas as well. Everyone should be gebenched to have bracha and hatzlacha in all areas of life, in fertility, in parnasa, in relationships, in everything, in all areas, health in general. Everyone should be blessed with a good, healthy year in ruchnius, in gashmius, in all of our endeavors. We should have hatzlacha, and I'm looking forward to hearing b'saras tovas, good news from everyone this year. Be'ez Hashem, it should bring just good things. So I thank you all for joining us. Be'ez Hashem, our Shabbos and Yontif should be uplifted and enhanced, especially now that we're hopefully a little bit more familiar with the halachas. And now I will take just a few minutes to get to some of the questions.